I had been living in my small apartment on the 4th floor of a crumbling building in Detroit for only 6 months when it happened. The night was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, as if the city itself had stopped breathing. I was finishing a late meal when the sound came, a slow dragging scrape along the hallway outside my door. Then silence, then another scrape. The sound was deliberate, heavy, as if something was pulling weight across the old wooden floorboards. I walked to the peephole, but saw nothing. The hallway light flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch too far. I pressed my ear against the door. The sound stopped. Then, faintly, I heard a noise that was not human breathing. It was wet and irregular, almost like the air passing through a throat filled with liquid. My skin prickled and my stomach tightened. Suddenly the light in the hallway went out completely. In the darkness, I heard the metallic click of something touching my door handle. I froze. The handle turned slowly, but the deadbolt held. The motion stopped, and for a moment I thought it had gone away. Then came a faint but distinct tapping, like fingernails on metal, followed by a low vibration that passed through the door and into my bones. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the door. I wanted to call someone, but my phone screen stayed black when I tried to turn it on. The power was still on inside the apartment, yet the device was dead. I reached for the landline on my kitchen counter and pressed the receiver to my ear. No dial tone, only a faint static whispering that grew louder the longer I held it. Within that static, I began to make out patterns, almost like words, but in a language that twisted in my head until I felt nauseous. The sound in the hallway moved again, slower this time. It scraped along the wall toward the stairwell. I should have felt relief, but the silence it left behind was worse. My eyes kept darting toward the balcony. The wind outside had stopped completely, and the branches of the dead trees below did not sway at all. I tried to shake off the fear by turning on the television, but every channel was nothing but gray static. Then the image shifted on its own, showing the security camera feed from the building's front entrance. I had never connected the television to that system. On the screen, the glass door was sealed shut by thick black material that looked like tar, pulsing slightly as if alive. Something on the other side moved against it, pressing shapes into the surface that suggested limbs, though too many for a human. A sudden pounding shook my door, hard enough to rattle the frame. 3 slow hits, each heavier than the last. I felt the wood bend slightly with each impact. My mind screamed to hide, but my body moved to the bedroom on instinct. I slid under the bed, clutching the heavy flashlight I kept there. Through the gap between the bed and the floor, I could see the thin strip of light from the hallway leaking through the bottom of my door. The sound stopped again. Then the strip of light disappeared entirely, as though something massive was blocking it. A shadow shifted, too wide for a person, and stayed there for what felt like minutes. Then, in total silence, the shadow bent down until I could see an eye looking through the gap under my door. The iris was pale gray, the pupil a vertical slit like that of a snake, but it seemed to expand and contract as if breathing. I could not move. I could not blink. My muscles locked in terror as the eye stayed there, unblinking, watching. My heart pounded so hard I feared it would give me away. Then a voice came from the other side, but it was my own voice, perfectly matched, speaking words I did not recognize, yet I knew instinctively that they were meant for me. The cadence of my own speech patterns in a tongue I could not understand sent a deep shiver into my spine. The eye slowly retreated, and the strip of light returned. I stayed under the bed, unable to breathe properly. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps, but now they were going in every direction at once, as though there were many feet moving across every floor. I heard my upstairs neighbor scream, a high wet sound cut off halfway through. Then silence returned. That was the moment I realized I could not leave. Something had sealed the building from the outside. and something else was already inside. I stayed under the bed until my lungs burned from shallow breaths. The urge to move fought against the primal command to stay hidden. When the silence grew heavy enough to feel like a weight pressing down on me, I slid out and gripped the flashlight tighter. My apartment felt smaller, every shadow stretching toward me as though alive. I moved to the door and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. Then, faintly, the sound of something dripping onto the floor outside. The drip was slow, deliberate, as though each drop had to travel through something thick before it fell. I imagined water, but the smell that seeped in through the crack told me it was not water. The stench was metallic and rotten. The smell of blood mixed with something chemical. My hands trembled as I unlocked the deadbolt. I only wanted to open it enough to see. The moment I turned the handle, the dripping stopped. The silence was so sudden, it was unnatural. My instincts screamed at me to lock it again, but before I could, something on the other side pushed back. Not hard, just enough to keep the door from closing. I shoved with all my strength, but whatever was there did not yield. Instead, it slid along the floor, pressing under the gap. A slick black mass, thin at first, then thickening like tar pulling itself inside. It spread across the wood like oil and water, yet it moved with purpose. I stumbled back as the mass shaped itself into something resembling a hand, but with too many fingers, each one ending in a sharp point. The fingers clawed at the floor, pulling the rest of it through. My heart pounded in my throat as I swung the flashlight beam at it. The light seemed to agitate the thing, making it twist and coil like it was trying to hide its shape. Then came a scream from down the hall, loud and human. The thing froze, then withdrew instantly, sliding back under the door and vanishing as quickly as it came. I heard rapid footsteps in the hallway, followed by a door slamming shut. The scream had come from Laura, the woman in apartment 4B. I had spoken to her only twice, but now the sound of her terror was unmistakable. I unlocked my door again and stepped into the hall, my pulse hammering. The light flickered, revealing dark smears along the wall, low to the floor. They looked like handprints, but each one had too many digits, and the smears trailed toward Laura's door. I approached slowly, hearing muffled sobs inside. I knocked and called her name. The sobbing stopped instantly. I called again, but this time, the voice that answered was not hers. It sounded like Laura, but wrong. The tone was too even, the pitch too steady. It said my name in a way that made my skin crawl, then asked me to come in. I stepped back, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The lock on her door clicked open by itself. The door creaked slowly inward. I shined the light into the apartment. At first it looked normal, but then I saw the far wall. Every inch of it was covered in black writing, symbols etched deep into the plaster, wet as if carved moments ago. They pulsed faintly, almost in rhythm with my heartbeat. The smell inside was suffocating, a mix of rot and burning hair. From the darkness beyond the wall of symbols, something moved toward me. I could see only its outline too tall, shoulders too narrow, head tilted unnaturally to one side. Its arms hung too long, swaying as it walked. I stepped back into the hallway, my beam catching a glint of its eyes. They were not human eyes. They reflected the light like those of an animal in the dark, but instead of two, there were 6, each, one focusing directly on me. The figure stopped in the doorway, tilting its head in a slow, almost curious motion. Then it smiled. Its mouth was far too wide, the skin at the corners splitting slightly as it stretched. The smell grew stronger. I felt my knees weaken. Then the door slammed shut with such force that the walls shook, leaving me alone in the hallway. From inside, the sobbing began again, but it was no longer muffled. It was right against the other side of the door, and it sounded like more than one person. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my living room with the flashlight, aimed at the door until the battery began to fade. Every sound from the hallway made my throat tighten. I thought about leaving, but the memory of that black substance pulsing against the front entrance on the security feed kept me inside. At some point near dawn, I heard heavy footsteps running up the stairs. They were uneven, like whoever it was injured or carrying something. A sharp knock rattled my door, and before I could respond, a voice shouted for help. It was Daniel from 5AI opened the door, and he stumbled in without waiting for an invitation. His shirt was soaked in blood, though I could not tell if it was his. His eyes were wide and unfocused. "They took Michael," he said, his voice cracking. I saw it grab him right out of the stairwell. It was not even a person anymore. Before I could ask anything, a scream erupted from above us. The ceiling vibrated with a thud heavy enough to shake dust from the plaster. Daniel and I both froze. The scream changed into a gurgling sound, then silence. I could hear liquid dripping onto the floor above us. Daniel muttered something under his breath and pulled a long kitchen knife from under his jacket. I grabbed my hatchet from beside the couch. We stepped into the hallway together, moving toward the stairwell. The smell hit us before we saw anything. Hot copper and rot so strong it burned the inside of my nose. On the landing between the 4th and 5th floors, something lay in a twisted heap. At first, I thought it was a pile of clothes. Then I saw the hand. The skin was pale and bloated, the nails torn and black. The rest of the body was half wrapped in something like blackened roots, pulsing faintly, almost feeding. The head was gone. Daniel backed away, his breath quick and shallow. Then we heard it, a slow, wet, dragging sound from above. I looked up the stairwell. Something leaned over the railing on the 5th floor. Its shape was almost human, but stretched, too thin, the arms unnaturally long, ending in hooked claws. Its face was nothing but smooth skin, where eyes and mouth should have been. Yet somehow, I felt it looking at me. The black root-like tendrils coiled around its body, twitching. It dropped from the railing without a sound, landing on the landing in front of us with impossible grace. Daniel swung the knife wildly, but the thing moved faster than my eyes could track. It grabbed him by the jaw, forcing his mouth open, and something long and slick pushed from its chest, straight down his throat. Daniel convulsed, his eyes rolling back, his limbs jerking as if he were being emptied from the inside. Then it let him drop, his body twitching before going still. The thing turned toward me. I raised the hatchet, but my hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped it. It took a slow step forward. Then a loud crash came from somewhere below, like a door being ripped from its hinges. The thing froze, tilting its head, and without looking at me, it climbed the wall and vanished upward into the darkness above. I stood there, shaking, staring at Daniel's body. His skin had already taken on a grayish hue, and something black leaked slowly from his mouth. The smell was unbearable. My pulse roared in my ears. I ran back to my apartment and slammed the door. I realized then that whatever was inside this building was not hunting at random. It was moving through the floors, one by one, as if it was choosing who to take next, and it had not reached the ground floor yet. By mid-morning, the screams had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. The air felt heavier, like breathing underwater. I had not heard anyone leave the building. No sirens, no voices outside. It was as if the city beyond the walls had gone still. I tried my phone again. No service. Not even the emergency call screen would load. My laptop would not connect to the Wi-Fi, and when I checked the network settings, there were no available connections at all, not even the ones from nearby apartments. The building was blind and deaf. I thought about leaving anyway. When I reached the lobby, the glass doors were gone. Not broken, gone. The metal frames now ended in seamless concrete, where the glass should have been, the same color and texture as the rest of the walls. The entrance was simply no longer an entrance. I touched the surface. It was warm, and for a moment, I felt a faint vibration, like a heartbeat. From behind me, a voice told me not to touch it. I turned to see a group of tenants gathered near the old reception desk. Most I recognized from brief hellos in the hallway. There was Henry from To See, a retired firefighter, built like a slab of stone. Next to him was Angela from 3A, her face streaked with grime, hair matted from sweat. Beside her, a man I had never seen before, tall, pale, with eyes too wide, like they had been open far longer than they should have. Henry explained that every door and window had changed overnight. Angela said she had tried to break through her own kitchen wall, where the window used to be, and had found only more wall. They had also tried the fire escape, but the door to it had vanished. I told them about Daniel and the thing in the stairwell. The tall stranger did not react. He simply stared at me like he was listening to something far away. Then we heard it, a slow, deliberate knock. Not on any of our apartment doors, but from deep within the lobby wall itself. 3 knocks, spaced, evenly apart, followed by a faint scraping sound that moved from one end of the wall to the other, like something large dragging itself just beneath the surface. Henry gripped the axe he had taken from the old fire cabinet and whispered for everyone to back away. The knocking stopped. Angela broke the silence, saying we should stick together, hole up in one of the larger apartments, and barricade ourselves. But the tall stranger shook his head. His voice was flat when he spoke, telling us that staying together would only make it easier for it to feed. When Henry demanded to know what he meant, the stranger smiled faintly and said he had been in a place like this before. That it was not the building that had sealed us in, it was alive, and it was swallowing us piece by piece. Henry moved toward him, ready to shove him back, but the stranger stepped close instead and whispered something in Henry's ear. Henry froze, his face draining of color. Without another word, he walked toward the stairwell and disappeared upward. Angela called after him, but the stranger only said we should be glad Henry was gone, because when it came for the next one, it would not be any of us. The scraping sound started again, this time overhead. The lobby lights flickered, and in the brief darkness, I thought I saw the stranger's shadow stretch far longer than his body, reaching across the ceiling like thin black arms. When the lights came back on, he was still staring at me, and this time, he said my name. I did not remember telling the stranger my name. I was sure I had not. Yet there it was, on his lips, spoken with a calmness that made my skin prickle. Angela demanded to know how he knew it too, but he ignored her and walked toward the hallway leading to the laundry room. I followed despite myself, my hands clammy against the hatchet handle. The laundry room looked wrong. I had used it 100 times, but now the fluorescent lights buzzed with a low hum that matched the rhythm of my pulse. The washing machines were gone. In their place were doorless openings in the wall, each large enough for a person to crawl through, each leading into absolute black. The stranger stood in front of one of the openings and spoke into it softly, like calling to a child. I could not hear the words, but I felt them in my teeth, a faint vibration. Then something inside the darkness answered. It was not a voice, not exactly, more like the sound of wet fabric being twisted. Angela screamed. I spun to see her pressed against the far wall, staring upward. The ceiling above her was bending down, bulging like something heavy was pressing against it from the other side. The paint split open, revealing a slick, dark surface beneath. Before we could move, the bulge dropped. It was not the ceiling at all, but a mass of blackened tendrils, glistening and writhing. They wrapped around Angela's arms and legs, pinning her to the floor. Her scream was cut short as one tendril pushed into her mouth, forcing her jaw open wider than it should have gone. Her eyes rolled back, her chest convulsed, and then her skin began to sag, as if something inside her was draining away. I swung the hatchet at the tendrils, hitting one. It shuddered under the blade, spraying a thin mist of black fluid that burned when it touched my skin. But the tendrils did not release her. In seconds, Angela's body was flat against the floor, her skin pale and loose like wet paper. The tendrils pulled her into the ceiling's dark opening and were gone. I turned to the stranger, ready to attack him for doing nothing, but he was already walking toward the lobby. I followed, my breath ragged, rage and fear burning through my chest. We reached the front desk again, and that was when I saw it. Words were slowly etching themselves into the wall above the desk. They appeared as deep scratches in the plaster, one letter at a time, forming two short sentences. The first was Angela's name. The second was mine. The stranger smiled faintly and told me that the building always knew who was next. The scratching sound did not stop. Below my name, the wall began carving a third. I watched each letter appear, my stomach knotting tighter with every one. It was Henry's. From somewhere above us came a single, sharp scream, then nothing. Henry's scream cut off so abruptly that I almost thought I had imagined it. But the stranger looked toward the stairwell with something that resembled satisfaction. I ran for the stairs, ignoring his warning that there was no point. The stairwell smelled like rust and wet stone. My boots left faint impressions on the steps, as if the concrete was softening under my weight. By the time I reached the third floor, I realized the hallway was wrong. It was far longer than it should have been. The doors on either side were numbered, but in no order I recognized. 5C, 2A, 9B. I passed my own apartment number twice, but when I tried the knob, it opened into entirely different rooms, one filled with nothing but rows of rusted bed frames, another lined floor to ceiling with identical, unblinking porcelain dolls. A scraping sound came from ahead. I followed it, half believing it might be Henry. Instead, I found him standing at the end of the hallway. His back was to me, and he was facing a wall that seemed to breathe, the plaster rising and falling in slow, steady waves. I called his name. He turned. It was Henry's face, but it was stretched somehow, his jaw slightly too long, his eyes wider than they should have been. His skin had a grayish tint, and his hands were pressed flat to the breathing wall, as though he was listening to its heartbeat. He told me he had seen what was on the other side, and that it was beautiful. His voice was calm, almost hypnotic. I took a step toward him, but the wall exhaled. A gust of hot, damp air rushed over me, carrying the smell of blood and soil. Henry's fingers sank into the plaster like it was wet clay. The wall swallowed his arms, then his shoulders. He did not resist. His last words before the wall pulled him in were for me to stop fighting. When the wall was smooth again, the hallway, lights flickered. In the brief dark, I thought I saw shapes standing between the doors, figures with human outlines but no features. When the light returned, they were gone. I ran back toward the stairwell, but it was no longer there. The hallway ended in a door I had never seen before. It was painted black, with a brass knob that was warm to the touch. I opened it and found myself back in the lobby. The stranger was waiting. He said the building had started to rearrange itself. Faster now. That soon there would be no safe place left. He asked if I had seen Henry. I told him what happened, and he nodded, as though I had just confirmed something he already knew. The wall above the desk still had our names carved into it. Henry's was now scratched out. Beneath it, a new one was forming. It was not a name I recognized. The stranger whispered that sometimes the building brings in people from outside, just to keep feeding. The wall finished carving the new name while I watched. The letters were uneven, as though the building itself was impatient. The name was Daniel Ross. I did not know him. I asked the stranger who Daniel was, but he only looked toward the front door. I followed his gaze. The door, which should have opened toward the street, was now a black rectangle of night, with no sign of the city beyond. Footsteps came from inside that darkness, slow and deliberate. A man stepped through. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a damp gray coat. His hair was plastered to his head, as though he had been walking in the rain, but there had been no rain when this all started. He stopped just inside the lobby and looked straight at me, ignoring the stranger entirely. "You should not be here," he said. His voice was low, flat, and it made the hair on my arms rise. I told him I could say the same. He smiled faintly, but his eyes did not change. I asked how he got inside. He said there was no inside and outside anymore, not for places like this. Then he turned his head toward the ceiling, as if listening to something above us. His smile widened. "It is moving," he said. "It knows you are still resisting." Before I could ask what he meant, the lobby lights flickered again. When they came back, Daniel was standing much closer to me. I had not heard him move. The smell of wet earth was stronger now, clinging to his coat. He told me that everyone who stays long enough stops being themselves, and that the building had already started working on me. I stepped back, my grip tightening on the hatchet. He did not follow. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, rusted key. He said it would open a door I was not supposed to find, and that I should use it before the stranger talked me out of it. The stranger finally spoke, telling me not to take it, but Daniel simply placed the key on the front desk, right beneath the wall where our names were carved. Then he turned and walked toward the stairwell, a stairwell that had not been there seconds ago. I shouted after him, but when I followed, the stairs led into nothing but an unbroken brick wall. Daniel was gone. The stranger stared at the key like it was something poisonous. He said doors in this building do not always lead where you think. Some lead to places far worse than what is here, but he would not touch it. That night, as I tried to sleep in one of the few rooms that still looked normal, I heard the sound of metal scraping against wood. I lit my flashlight and saw the key resting on the floor by my bed. Though I had left it in the lobby, I picked it up without meaning to. My hand would not let it go. I woke to the sound of someone breathing inside the room. The flashlight rolled from my hand and hit the floor, spinning the beam across the walls. There was no one there, but the breathing did not stop. It was coming from behind the wardrobe. I dragged it aside and found a narrow doorway. It had not been there before. The wood frame looked rotted, but the key in my hand seemed to hum as I brought it close. I could feel the vibration through my skin. The key slid into the lock with a smoothness that made my stomach twist. The door opened outward, and the first thing I saw was the same hallway I had walked earlier, the one with the mismatched numbers. But this time, the lights were dimmer, and every door was slightly open. I stepped inside. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the air changed. It was thicker, heavier, and carried a faint metallic temps. The door behind me closed without sound. From the nearest open room, a voice whispered my name. I froze. It was my own voice, calling from inside. I stepped closer, pushing the door wider. Inside was a perfect copy of my apartment. My coat hung on the hook, my shoes by the door, my phone on the table. The only difference was the window. Instead of the street outside, it showed a view of the lobby, as though I was looking down from the ceiling. The lobby was empty, except for myself, standing there with the hatchet, staring up at where I should have been. The version of me in the room turned its head toward me. The movement was too sharp, too deliberate. It smiled in a way I have never smiled. I ran back into the hallway, slamming the door. My breathing echoed too loud in the silence. Halfway down the hall, I saw another door at the end. Its surface looked wet, and when I got closer, I saw that it was covered in a thin layer of pulsating skin. The key in my hand grew hotter, almost burning. Behind the door, something moved. The bulge pressed outward, stretching the skin, and a muffled voice spoke. It sounded like Henry, begging me to open it. My hand went to the lock. That was when I felt the stranger's grip on my shoulder. I had not heard him approach. His eyes were fixed on the door, his face pale. He told me that if I opened it, the building would stop rearranging because it would no longer need to, and I would never leave. The voice on the other side began to cry. It was exactly the way Henry used to cry, soft and broken. I stood there, torn between the stranger's warning and the pull of the voice. Then the lights went out. The darkness was complete. I could not see my hand in front of my face, but the voice behind the fleshy door kept speaking, now faster, almost panicked. The stranger whispered for me to step away. His hand trembled on my shoulder. Something wet touched my ankle. I froze. The floor beneath me pulsed once, like a living thing, and then the smell hit, copper and rot so thick it filled my throat. The voice on the other side stopped crying and began to laugh. Not Henry's laugh. I knew then I was not standing in a hallway anymore. The walls around me shifted, and I felt them brushing against my arms in the dark, warm and damp. The stranger's grip tightened, but I stepped forward anyway. The key burned in my palm. I shoved it into the lock and turned. The door swung inward, and pale light spilled out, revealing what had been whispering to me. It was not a room. It was a vast organic chamber, its walls slick and glistening. In the center was something like a throat, slowly contracting. With each movement, it spoke, and the sound was like every person I had ever known speaking at once. The floor was a mesh of muscle and bone. I saw shapes half submerged in it, faces I recognized, eyes open and moving, but unable to blink. They followed me as I stepped inside. The stranger shouted from behind me, but his voice sounded distant. I could hear the building's heartbeat now, deep and slow, shaking the floor. The throat widened, revealing darkness within. And far down in that dark, I saw something moving upward. It was Daniel. His body was covered in the same slick membrane as the walls. His eyes rolled white. He crawled up the throat toward me, his mouth opening too wide for his face. The walls contracted sharply, pulling him back, but his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. His skin was cold, almost rubbery. He told me that I had already been inside the building longer than I thought, that the city outside was gone, and that if I wanted to see the real world again, I would have to feed it something it had never tasted. Before behind him, the throat trembled with anticipation. The stranger appeared in the doorway, screaming for me to step away. Daniel's grip tightened. His other hand reached for the hatchet at my side. I had to choose, strike Daniel, the stranger, or myself. The building was waiting. The key was still in my hand. Daniel's grip dug into my wrist. The stranger's shouts blurred into the wet pulse of the walls. The building's heartbeat grew faster, like it was leaning closer to hear my choice. I swung the hatchet. Daniel's head jerked back, not from the blade but from the stranger pulling him away. They fell into the pulsing floor together, their limbs tangling. The muscle beneath them opened like a trap, swallowing them in one slow gulp. Their screams merged, then vanished into the deep vibration of the building. The throat closed, shuddering, and the walls around me began to stretch outward. A seam tore open in the far side of the chamber, revealing daylight. It was not the daylight I remembered. I stepped through, expecting the street outside my apartment, but the world beyond was wrong. Buildings leaned at impossible angles, their windows blinking like eyes. The sky was the color of raw meat, and everywhere, doors stood open, leading into darkness that seemed to breathe. Behind me, the chamber sealed shut, leaving no trace of the door. The key in my hand crumbled into dust. A voice whispered from the nearest open doorway. It was my own, calling me inside. I turned and saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was me, but older, gaunt, and smiling in that same impossible way I had seen before. He told me the building had many rooms, and I had only seen the first dot as he stepped forward. I realized the doors in this place did not lead back to where I had come from. They only led deeper in. The sky pulsed with the rhythm of the building's heartbeat. I knew then I had never escaped. I had only moved to another part of it, and somewhere, behind one of those doors, the building was already making another version of me, waiting for the next visitor to turn the key.